Everybody, we were talking about the digestive system, right? And we stopped here in last class. You have learned that in the wall of your GI tract there are four layers. From inside to outside, those layers are mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and serosa. So those are the four layers in the wall of the GI tract. Now, in the wall, there are two sets of nerves or nerve plexuses. Nerves form networks or plexus in two locations. One nerve plexus is found in the submucosa layer. That means the second layer under the mucosa, the second layer from inside. That's the submucosa, right? So in the submucosa, there is one set of nerve plexus, and this nerve plexus regulates mainly the secretion from the glands of GI tract. And weak contraction is also controlled by this nerve plexus. Weak contraction and secretion. Another set of nerve plexus is present in the muscularis externa layer. And this nerve plexus mainly controls the movement, GI tract motility, because it is present in the muscularis layer. So you know that muscles help in the movement, right? So this one mainly regulates the motility or movement of GI tract. Both sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of autonomic nervous system are present in the GI tract. So GI tract also has autonomic nervous system fibers or autonomic nerve fibers, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Just know the functions. Sympathetic stimulation inhibits the secretion and motility. Parasympathetic stimulation increases the secretion and motility. So opposite action. Different types of movements in the GI tract. Three types of movements occur in the GI tract. What are those? Peristalsis, then segmentation, and there is another type of movement in some books have mentioned that is called pendular movement. So these are three types of movements in GI tract. Peristalsis movement starts from one location. Like if you see here, look at me, this is your GI tract. Peristalsis contraction starts at one location, for example here, and then it moves like wave, ends, then starts again like this. So one after another, like wave, but starts from one location. It is like, you know, if you take a rubber tube and put a ring inside it, okay, and make some slippery thing put inside and hold from outside like this the ring, the end of ring, and push like this inside the tube, okay. So put a ring inside the tube and push like this. That is peristalsis, and ring is the food bolus, right? So the purpose is moving the food downwards. That is peristalsis. Segmentation occurs at multiple locations at the same time. Now look at me again. If this is your GI tract, segmentation, contraction starts at several locations at the same time, like this, okay? Multiple locations at the same time. And that breaks the long food bolus into multiple pieces, many pieces. So, peristalsis and segmentation. If you see the picture here, peristalsis occurs at one location, segmentation at multiple locations. Now, pendular movement, you know, the mesentery, you must remember in last class I showed you inside the abdominal cavity is inwards and then covers the internal organs, right? So this is the mesentery, and the GI tract can move like this, like a pendulum inside the abdominal cavity, because it is hanging actually by mesentery. Mesentery is attaching it to the body wall. So that is another type of movement. Okay, so those are three types of movements of GI tract. Now we'll talk about the esophagus. Esophagus is a muscular tube. It is narrow and flat muscular tube that takes food from the laryngopharynx. That is the last part of the pharynx, you know. So esophagus receives food bolus from the laryngopharynx and gives it to the stomach. And esophagus pierces through the diaphragm, because you know that diaphragm is the muscle that separates the thoracic and abdominal cavity. So your diaphragm is here, right? So esophagus passes through the diaphragm and then enters into the stomach. Your stomach is here. Okay. So this is the diaphragm. This is the esophagus, and this is the stomach, right? Like this. So the opening in the diaphragm for the esophagus, that is called hiatus. Esophageal hiatus. That's the hole in the diaphragm for the esophagus, through which the esophagus passes. Esophageal hiatus. Now, sometimes what happens, you know, this hiatus can get bigger. So, a part of the stomach can pop out like this. Part of the stomach can pop out through that big opening if the hiatus gets bigger, wider, and that is called hiatal hernia. Hernia indicates the movement of any body part from its normal location to abnormal location. So you see a small part of stomach is pushed out through that hiatus, and that is called the hiatal hernia. The epithelial lining of the esophagus, inner lining of the esophagus, is stratified squamous. You know the reason, right? Friction. It is a narrow tube, flat tube, right? So food bolus, when it passes, causes friction. That's why the lining is stratified squamous. Now, another important thing you need to know that the upper part of the esophagus is skeletal muscle. It is the muscular tube, right? So, a skeletal muscle, and lower part is smooth. Muscle. So, esophagus consists of both skeletal and smooth muscle. As you know that in the wall of GI tract you have 4 layers. So esophagus is a part of GI tract, so it also has 4 layers. Mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, externa. But in case of esophagus, the outermost layer is called adventitia, not serosa. Okay. In other parts of GI tract, it is serosa. You remember I talked before, mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and the outermost is the serosa. But in case of esophagus, outermost layer is called adventitia. Glands. In esophagus, 2 types of glands are present, and the glands secrete mucus, and this mucus makes the surface slippery, so the food bolus can quickly go to the stomach. So once the food bolus enters into the esophagus, since the inner surface is slippery because of mucus secretion, then food bolus quickly reaches to the stomach. So just know that esophageal glands secrete mucus. So when you swallow the food, 2 factors move the food bolus through the esophagus quickly. One is the movement that is called peristalsis. I just mentioned a few minutes ago. Peristalsis movement occurs in the esophagus, and the secretion of mucus, which makes the surface slippery. So those 2 factors quickly move the food bolus to the stomach. Okay. Deglutition. Deglutition is also called swallowing. Same thing, swallowing of the food bolus. After you make the food bolus inside the mouth, you use the tongue to push the food behind towards the pharynx, and that is the starting of swallowing or deglutition. After you make the food bolus in the mouth, you use the tongue to push it backwards. That is the starting. The entire swallowing or deglutition has 2 phases: buccal or buccal phase and pharyngoesophageal phase, also called pharyngeal esophageal phase. Buccal phase is voluntary because you all know buccal means mouth, oral cavity, buccal cavity. So that part is voluntary. If you decide after you make the food bolus, if you decide you won't swallow it, you can do it, right? You can keep it inside your mouth. If you decide to push it, you can do it, right? So that part is voluntary. Once you push the food into the pharynx, then you don't think, right, where it is going. You know that it will go to the stomach by itself. So the last part is involuntary. That's why you never think. After you push the food towards the pharynx, you don't need to think, or it will go to the stomach. You know that. That is involuntary, controlled by the brain. medulla. You have control center for the second phase. Okay. So what we do during swallowing? You see the food bolus inside the mouth. First, we push the front part of the tongue against the hard palate. You see, hard palate is the bony part of the palate, right? And you push the front part of your tongue against the palate. That pushes the food bolus backwards. Okay. When you do that, you see the upper esophageal sphincter is closed or contracted. So esophagus has two sphincters, upper and lower. Here you see the upper end of esophagus where you have the upper esophageal sphincter which is closed. Then once the food enters into the pharynx, you see here, moving downwards, the upper esophageal sphincter gets opened to let the food bolus get in to the esophagus. It should happen. Another thing happens, you see the uvula. Look at the uvula, end of soft palate, moves up to close the entrance of nasopharynx. So the food bolus will only move downwards, will not be able to go upwards, will not be able to enter into the nasopharynx or nasal cavity. If food enters there, it is, very uncomfortable, right? Discomfort if food enters into the nose or even a small piece. So the uvula moves up, so the food bolus cannot move up, will move downwards. So here two things happen. Uvula moves up to close the entrance of nasopharynx, and upper esophageal sphincter gets open to let the food get into the esophagus. Once the food bolus is entirely into the esophagus, the upper esophageal sphincter gets constricted again, which makes sense, right? If it remains open, then food can again go upwards, right, and enter into your pharynx. You don't want that. You want to make sure that food moves downwards. So food bolus, once the food bolus enters into the upper part of esophagus, then it moves very fast because peristalsis starts, right? The contraction, peristalsis movement, and the surface is slippery. So you are like sitting on, kids sit on, what is that called? Sled, yeah, sits on, right? Then quickly goes down to the bottom, right? So once the food enters into the upper part, then peristalsis moves the food, and since the surface is slippery, it will go to the lower end of the esophagus. Now, at the lower end of the esophagus, you have another sphincter that is called gastroesophageal sphincter. Makes sense. Gastro means stomach, esophagus. It is between the esophagus and the stomach. Gastroesophageal sphincter. This sphincter remains closed, only opens when the food bolus arrives at it, and it will quickly open and let the food bolus get in to the stomach. Okay, once the food bolus is into the stomach, then it will get closed again. So those are the things that happen during swallowing, and how swallowing or deglutition occurs. Okay. Now we'll talk about the stomach. Next to the esophagus is your stomach. Stomach is very dilated part of your GI tract, right? Wide, very wide. Why? Because stomach is designed for the storage of food. Number one, storage of food. or hours, and during that time lot of secretion occurs, gastric secretion, and that breaks the food, and also when the food stays inside the stomach, lot of secretion occurs, and the content inside the stomach is acidic, number one, because acid secretion occurs in the stomach, right? So the content becomes acidic. Number two, becomes very dilute. You know, the food bolus that entered into the stomach was like semi-solid food bolus, right? It's a like of semi-solid bolus of food, not liquid, but once it enters into the stomach, stays there for a few hours, lot of secretion occurs, right? Acid secretion breaks the food, so the content becomes acidic, and number two becomes liquid. That is called chyme or chyme, whatever you say, C-H-Y-M-E. The liquid content of food in the stomach. Okay. Parts of the stomach, the area where the esophagus enters, that area is called the cardiac region, around the entrance of the esophagus. Okay, cardiac, cardiac region or cardia. The dome-shaped part is called the fundus. It is like a dome, and then most middle part is the body. Now lower end is called the pylorus. Pylorus has pyloric antrum and pyloric canal. So if this is the stomach, you see, this is the esophagus, so this area is the cardiac or cardiac region. This part is the fundus, the dome shape fundus. This part wide, middle portion is the body, and this is pylorus. Now pylorus has two parts. The first wider part is called the pyloric antrum. So this part is the antrum, and last narrow part is called the canal. So pyloric antrum and pyloric canal. These are two parts. Then pyloric sphincter is here, that controls how much food will get out from the stomach. Okay. Now, if you see the muscularis external layer of the stomach, you remember four layers: mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and serosa, right? If you see the muscularis externa in the stomach, instead of two, it has three layers. In other parts of GI tract, for example, esophagus, small intestine, large intestine, muscularis externa has two layers: inner circular, outer longitudinal. But in stomach, you have an additional layer. That's why it has three layers of smooth muscles in muscularis externa. Innermost layer is an oblique layer, which is an extra layer here. So, exception is in the stomach. It has outer longitudinal, middle circular, and innermost oblique. In other parts of GI tract, you only have outer longitudinal, inner circular. Inside the stomach, the mucosa layer, innermost layer, you know that mucosa, that forms many folds. Those mucosal folds are called rugae. So rugae are the foldings of mucosa, innermost layer, and those foldings or folds are called gastric rugae. Rugae become very prominent when the stomach is empty, because it squeezes, right? When less food or the amount of food is less in the stomach gets narrow, smaller. So the rugae become more clearly visible. When the stomach is full, right, it gets big, so those foldings, won't be seen that clearly. So we can say that rugae helps to increase the surface area inside the stomach. Lesser omentum and greater omentum. Omentum are connective tissue membrane. You know, this border of the stomach is called the lesser curvature, and this border, outer border, is called the greater curvature. Makes sense. This is lesser, smaller, this is bigger curvature. And what happens, your liver is here. From the liver, the connective tissue membrane that goes to the lesser curvature here gets attached to the lesser curvature. This membrane is called lesser omentum. Okay, lesser omentum extends from the liver to the lesser curvature of the stomach. Then what happens? This omentum covers the entire stomach like this, you see, like this, and this side, those two coverings get together and unite here and drapes down like a curtain, or you know, sometimes you put bed sheet or tablecloth that hangs like this. So hangs like this from the greater curvature. This is called greater omentum. So this is greater omentum. Okay. So lesser omentum is the membrane that extends from the liver to the lesser curvature of the stomach, and then it covers the stomach, and from the greater curvature it drapes down, hangs like this. And this greater omentum does what you see here. In your abdominal wall you have muscle, right? And under the muscle, that abdominal wall, under the abdominal wall, that greater omentum is like this, covering all the abdominal organs from the front. And a lot of fat accumulates on the omentum. If more fat accumulates, the person's stomach gets bigger. Okay, sometimes like a lot of fat accumulates on the omentum, and this is a great location where the fats are stored in your body. Omentum has therefore few important functions. Number one, since this omentum is in the front of the abdominal organs, it protects the abdominal organ. Protection is number one. Number two, lot of fat are stored. So stored form of energy is the fat, you know that. So when you are starving, these fats could be used for your energy, right? So that is number two, storage of fats. Number three, insulation. Heat cannot easily pass through the fat layer. So the omentum, even if outside of your body it is very cold, the heat, the temperature will not change inside the abdominal cavity, because the fat will work as insulator, will not let the heat out or in. Here you see the lesser omentum from the liver to the stomach. They have dissected the greater omentum, that's why you don't see. If you dissect the greater omentum, then you will see the abdominal organs, intestine, right? So intestine actually is under the greater omentum. So protection, storage of fat, and insulation. Those are three functions, okay, of your omentum. Now,
the greater omentum, the same thing as the parietis or peritoneum?
No. Peritoneum is different. Peritoneum, omentum is just hanging here, right? Peritoneum is attached to the wall like this here and goes inwards. That is the mesentery, right? And covers each or this is just blanket in the front. Yes. So we have talked about this deglutition, stomach, okay, parts of the stomach, omentum. Okay, now let's start from this slide. Inside the stomach, you know that I have mentioned a lot of secretion occurs, right? Now, from where the secretion occurs? Gastric secretion occurs from the gastric glands, okay? Gastric means stomach. So, gastric glands. If you see the innermost layer, which is the mucosa, you know that. Under the microscope, you will see in the mucosa you have different types of cells, and those different types of cells secrete different chemicals. That's why those different types of cells together is called the gastric gland. So gastric gland is not a large gland. It is actually different types of cells. They together form the gastric gland in the mucosa of the stomach. Now, here in this picture, you see different types of cells have been shown by different colors. Okay, so you need to know what are those cells and what kind of secretion occurs. Different types of cells are mucous neck cells. These cells are the most common cells and they secrete thin acidic mucus. So mucus secretion is the function of neck cells. That's why they are called mucous neck cells. And mucus is very important secretion. Why mucus is very important? Anybody? Mucus makes the surface slippery, number one. Number two, it is more important. Inside the stomach, it is acidic, right? You remember I said the liquid fluid is acidic because a lot of acidic secretion, acid is secreted, hydrochloric acid is secreted there, right? So the mucus forms a barrier protection. So the liquid acid cannot get touch to the wall of the stomach. So mucus forms a protecting layer. So the acid will not touch the wall of the stomach. Very important, right? Otherwise stomach will burn. get burnt. So those two, slippery secretion and protects the wall of the stomach from the acid. Now, another type of cell is parietal. Parietal cells secrete hydrochloric acid. Chief cells secrete pepsin. Enteroendocrine cells, these are endocrine cells. Other cells are exocrine cells. You know, endocrine, exocrine, two types of hormones. So, enteroendocrine cells secrete hormone that is called gastrin. So, those are the cells. Here you see the secretion that occurs by the chip cells. That's the pepsinogen. That's the precursor of pepsin, inactive form. Then the parietal cells secrete hydrochloric acid. That hydrochloric acid is converting the pepsinogen, inactive pepsinogen, to active pepsin. So basically, the pepsinogen is an inactive form, and to convert it to active pepsin, you need the secretion of hydrochloric acid from the parietal cells. And once pepsin is formed, then pepsin also works on pepsinogen and converts the pepsinogen to pepsin. So hydrochloric acid as well as pepsin both work on pepsinogen and convert the pepsinogen to pepsin. That's why it is called positive feedback, increasing the conversion. Once the pepsin is being formed, then it is working on pepsinogen to produce more pepsin, right? So positive feedback. Couple of clinical conditions related to the stomach. Gastritis. Gastritis is the inflammation of the lining of the stomach. Okay, and if inflammation occurs, that can break the mucosal barrier that I have mentioned a few minutes ago. Mucosal barrier protects the stomach wall, and that can sometimes cause the lesion of or erosion of the stomach wall, and that if that happens, that is called peptic or gastric ulcer. So ulcer is the erosion of the wall of the stomach, but gastritis is a step before that. So gastritis is just inflammation. It's not yet erosion. It's not yet any bleeding. Just the redness and swelling of the inner line. But ulcer is more advanced stage. Sometimes it can cause bleeding, or even chronic ulcer can cause perforation. That means the hole can be formed in the wall, and that could be dangerous. There are few factors that can cause gastritis. One bacteria that has been identified is responsible for gastritis, that is called Helicobacter pylori. The name is Helicobacter pylori. Other factors are coffee too much, Smoking, right? Smoking can cause gastritis. Infection that I had mentioned, any kind of infection can cause gastritis, but Helicobacter pylori can lead to gastric ulcer. Alcohol consumption. Now, peptic ulcer, the term you commonly hear, peptic ulcer, that actually indicates gastric ulcer, that is the stomach, ulcer in the stomach, as well as duodenal ulcer. So, peptic ulcer could be gastric ulcer or duodenal ulcer. Most of the cases, peptic ulcer occurs in the duodenum. 80% cases we see ulcer occurs in the duodenum, peptic ulcer. Regulation of gastric secretion. In last class, I mentioned that two pathways, short reflex and long reflex, regulate the secretion and contraction or movement, because those two are the things that must be controlled, right? Secretion, depending on how much food, what kind of food you have taken, right? The secretion should be based on that. Also, how much contraction should occur depends on the amount of food in your stomach or GI tract. Now, the secretion or contraction can occur in three phases: cephalic phase, gastric phase, and intestinal phase. Now, cephalic phase, this one I have actually explained to you in last class. The term cephalic means head. So what is happening in the head that can cause secretion in the stomach? When you smell the food, if you are hungry, right? That you remember I said, if you are hungry, you smell the food, even if you don't see, food is not in your mouth, secretion can occur, right? So it is happening. Even if you think about food in your head, that can happen, right? Vision, if you see the food, secretion can occur in the stomach, right? So smell, thinking, vision, and taste. If you put the food in your mouth, on your tongue, secretion can occur in the stomach. That is the gastric secretion. We are talking about, remember, gastric secretion, secretion in the stomach. Okay? So that is the cephalic phase. Even food is not yet in the stomach. Is it clear? Like seeing the food, thinking the food, smelling the food, tasting the food. Secretion occurs in the stomach, gastric secretion. Now, gastric phase occurs after the food arrives in your stomach. So, after the food enters in the stomach, then stomach secretes the chemicals. You remember the gastric gland, different types of cells, parietal, chief cell, right? Enteroendocrine cells, mucous neck cells. So, those cells secrete the chemicals in presence of food, because of presence of food. That is gastric, right? Because gastric is the stomach. And now, you see, once the food enters from the stomach, into the duodenum. This is the first part of the small intestine. The food molecules are here now from the stomach. Your duodenum can check the status of digestion. Is this food well digested or not? If this part of your small intestine thinks that the foodstuffs are not well digested from the small intestine, signal can go to the stomach wall and can stimulate the gland to secrete more chemicals to do better job. Okay, so duodenum can send signal, and now you see that is called the intestinal phase. Intestine is sending signal to the stomach wall to do better job, to better digestion. So that's why it is called the intestinal phase. That means food is in the intestine, but secretion occurs in the stomach. Okay, now we'll talk about the small intestine. Small intestine is mainly responsible for digestion and absorption of nutrients. So, digestion and absorption of nutrients. Stomach is mainly responsible for what? And digestion, right? Because acidic secretion occurs. So, stomach is mainly storage and digestion. Small intestine mainly digestion and absorption, taking the nutrients into the blood. Small intestine is 2 to 4 meter long, very long, and starts at the pyloric sphincter here, you know that, pyloric sphincter, and ends at the cecum here. So the last part is the ilium, and this is the cecum. So this is called ileocecal valve. So pyloric sphincter to the ileocecal valve. That is the extent. 3 parts of the small intestine are duodenum, that's the first and shortest part, and then jejunum and ilium. So duodenum, jejunum and ilium. Duodenum is retroperitoneal, located outside of the peritoneal cavity. You remember 2 kidneys are retroperitoneal. Duodenum is also retroperitoneal. So 3 parts, right? Last part is the ilium that goes to the cecum, and inside the duodenum you will see 2 tiny openings, 2 small openings. Upper one is called the minor duodenal papilla, and lower one is called the major duodenal papilla. We have seen this in your lab model. Minor duodenal papilla is for the accessory pancreatic duct. You see here the pancreatic duct inside the pancreas, that pink color duct, and from the main pancreatic duct a branch arises and enters into the duodenum. So main one enters into the duodenum as well as the branch. The accessory pancreatic duct is the branch that enters into the duodenum. The accessory one enters at the upper part, and the main one enters into the duodenum below that. Now, those are the 2 papilla or opening. Now, the main pancreatic duct, this is important, joins the bile duct, common bile duct, just before they enter into the duodenum. You see the green one, that's the bile duct, comes from above, and the main pancreatic duct from the pancreas. They join together just outside of the duodenum and then enter into the duodenum at the major duodenal papilla. Now you see the accessory pancreatic duct is a branch that enters separately at minor duodenal papilla. That's why there are two openings. Okay. Now, why the pancreatic duct and bile duct enter into the duodenum? You know, the bile duct brings the bile from the gallbladder, liver, right? Bile is brought by the bile duct, and this is the pancreatic duct, the main pancreatic duct here, and they join here, and this part is kind of a dilated, expanded part here when they join together. That is called ampulla. You must have heard the term ampulla is dilated part of the tube. If any tube like this is a tube gets kind of dilated, that is called ampulla. So this is hepatopancreatic ampulla. Okay, and then it enters into the duodenum at this opening. This opening is called major duodenal papilla. So papilla is the opening, ampulla is the dilated portion of the tube. So this is the ampulla where the bile duct and the main pancreatic duct join. And then this is the opening in the duodenum, that is the major duodenal papilla. So bile enters into the duodenum as well as pancreatic juice enters into the duodenum. From the pancreas, pancreatic juice, from the gallbladder and liver, bile. And pancreatic juice and bile help in digestion, chemical digestion of the food. That's why both are entering into the duodenum. Now, another thing you need to know is the passage of bile. How the bile comes from the liver and then goes to the duodenum, the pathway of bile. First thing you need to know that bile is secreted by the liver cells. So the liver secretes bile, and from the liver two ducts take the bile out. Hepatic ducts, right and left. Hepatic means liver, very simple. So from the liver, hepatic ducts come out, right and left hepatic ducts. Then they join together just outside of the liver and form the common hepatic duct, because common is the joining of two here. So right and left hepatic duct, remember hepatic ducts join to form common hepatic duct. Then from the common hepatic duct, the bile, most of the bile enter into the gallbladder. So most of the bile goes to where? The gallbladder. Okay? Through the cystic duct. Cystic duct. So you see here the cystic duct is attached to the gallbladder. And gallbladder does what? Why bile should enter into the gallbladder? Gallbladder concentrates the bile many times So makes the dilute bile highly concentrated by absorbing water from it. So the bile comes from the liver, is diluted, lot of water in it. When the bile is in the gallbladder, the water is absorbed, taken out. So the bile gets very highly but concentrated. Make sense? And that's why the function of the gallbladder is storage of the bile and concentrating the bile. So storage and concentrating bile are the functions of gallbladder. Make sense? And then when you eat fat rich food, the gallbladder constricts, contraction of gallbladder occurs. Make sense? That will push the bile out through the cystic duct, and the bile enters into the common bile duct. Now I am talking about bile duct, not hepatic duct. So cystic duct and common hepatic duct together, when joined, they form the bile duct, which is also known as common bile duct. Same thing, bile duct or common bile duct. And that common bile duct or bile duct is very long and goes all the way to ampulla here, hepatopancreatic ampulla, right? This is the bile duct, bringing bile here, and then bile enters into the duodenum. What kind of food stimulates the contraction of gallbladder? Fat-rich food, right? Because bile is needed for the digestion and absorption of fat. Is it clear? So if you eat a lot of fat-rich food, more bile is needed. So contraction of gallbladder will be stronger. Ejection of bile will be what? More. Is it clear? Because bile helps in the digestion and absorption of fat. So if someone's gallbladder has been removed, should that person eat a lot of fat? No. You can, if you take supplemental, bile as medicine from outside. So usually you will see the doctors will suggest not to, eat too much fat-rich food if you don't have gallbladder, because bile is important. In this connection, also know that pancreatic juice also enters, right, from the pancreas. Pancreatic juice is very important. It has all three types of digestive enzymes: lipase, amylase, as well as protease. So pancreatic juice contains all types of digestive enzymes. So pancreatic juice can digest proteins, carbohydrates, fats. Inside the small intestine, if you see inside, you will see circular folds. Those are called plicae circularis. So if you see inside, it's like this, circular folds inside. And plicae circularis, if this is one plicae circularis, on the plicae circularis you have many finger-like structures. Those are called villi, or some people say villi. So this is plicae circularis, and these are villi. And then on the villi you have hair-like structures like this. These are called microvilli. Okay, so micro, so plica circularis, then villi, and then microvilli. All these structures increase the surface area inside many folds, many times, because all these are increasing the surface area, right? So if you add all these surfaces, all these folding surfaces together, increases the intestinal absorptive surface area many times more. So increasing the surface area for better absorption, helping in absorption is the function of these structures. By increasing surface area many times. Okay. So the food is here outside, the food molecules, nutrients, right, and will be absorbed easily. So just know those are the structures you will see inside the stomach, small intestine. Here you see those finger-like structures are villi, and if you see under very powerful microscope, you will be able to see the microvilli on the villi. And inside the villi, you see the blood vessels as well as lymphatic vessel. The lymphatic vessel is called lacteal. You already know that. Helps in absorption of fat. And blood vessels help in the absorption of proteins and carbohydrates. Peyer's patches, you already know that the aggregated lymphoid follicles, we have talked about this before, in the distal part of the small intestine. Duodenal glands, in the duodenum we have duodenal glands, those are also called Brunner's glands and secrete mucus. So that's the small intestine. Now the liver, the largest gland in the body. Liver is considered as a gland, although it is an accessory digestive organ, but this is also considered as the largest gland of the body because the hormones are secreted by the liver. Liver has 4 lobes. The largest is the right lobe, then second largest is the left lobe, and 2 other small lobes are caudate and quadrate. Liver is tied to the body wall by falciform ligament. Liver is a large organ. It must be held attached to the body wall. So falciform ligament plays very important role. Suspends liver from the diaphragm and anterior body wall, abdominal wall. And by looking at falciform ligament, you can separate the right and left lobes because the falciform ligament is attached in between the right and left lobe. Here you see the attached part of this ligament. That part is attached to the liver between right and left lobe. Here you see those 4 lobes. This is the inferior view of the liver. You are looking the bottom part. So you can see the right lobe, left lobe, quadrate and caudate lobe. You see the quadrate lobe, which is rectangular, quadri means 4, rectangular, is located beside the gallbladder. So that's the easiest way to know which one is quadrate. Caudate is beside the inferior vena cava. In this picture, they have removed the inferior vena cava, but you can see the impression, deep groove, right, where the inferior vena cava is located. Sulcus for inferior vena cava. So next to the inferior vena cava, you have the caudate lobe. Another thing you need to know, the area through which the blood vessels and the ducts, you remember right and left hepatic ducts, they come out from the liver. So the ducts and blood vessels pass that area is called the porta hepatis. It is like hilum of the lung, porta hepatis. The pathway of bile I have already mentioned, right? Inside the liver, if you cut the liver and see the tissue under the microscope, beautifully organized. Inside the liver, you see the tissue consists of many hexagonal structures. That means 6 angles. Hexagonal. And these are called liver lobules. In the center of each lobule, you have the opening, and that is for the blood vessels and central vein. The name of that blood vessel is central vein. So here you see many hexagonal, and inside each lobule, hexagonal is the lobule, and inside the center of each lobule you have the opening for central vein. And now the cells are called hepatocytes. Cyte means cell, hepato means liver. So hepatocyte cells are also beautifully organized like this, radiating from the central vein. From the central vein, going different directions, like this. So these are the liver cells called what? Hepatocytes, right? Like this. So these are hepatocytes. Lined up beautifully inside the lobule. Now, at the corner of each angle, you have portal tract. Let me see. Portal tract, you see right bottom. Portal tract is the structure located in each angle of hexagon or liver lobule. So this is portal tract. And inside the portal tract you have artery, vein and bile duct, branch of duct. So those 3 structures inside each portal tract. You have an artery, you have a vein and you have a duct. So this is portal tract, you have artery, vein, duct, right? And that's how beautifully the liver structure is. Now, see here another thing. This is amazing that each hepatocyte is attached to a very thin, like here, thin here, like duct. Those are called the bile canaliculi. So each liver cell here is attached to a bile canaliculi. like this. And you know already that liver cells or hepatocytes secrete bile. So the bile can enter quickly into those canaliculi, and then canaliculi join together to form larger ducts, and then eventually the larger duct will enter into the duct here at the portal tract. So form like this, canaliculi will give bile, collect bile from each cell, and will give to the portal tract where we have larger duct. So that's why bile can be collected from each cell of the liver. Okay, the function of liver. Liver is the main organ for the processing of nutrients. That's why you have hepatic portal circulation. You remember that? From the intestine, I mentioned the nutrients are taken to the liver by hepatic portal circulation. Remember that? So why nutrients are taken to the liver? Because liver is the main organ of your body that is responsible for the processing. First processing of the nutrients occur in the liver. Liver stores vitamins. Fat-soluble vitamins are stored in the liver. Water-soluble vitamins are not stored in your body, you know that, excreted through the urine, right? So only fat-soluble vitamins are stored, alright, mostly in the liver. Detoxification of toxic chemicals, neutralizing the toxic chemicals is another function of the liver. And production of bile, right? About 900 milliliter bile is produced by the liver in each day. So bile helps in the absorption of fat and digestion of fat. Digestion and the absorption of fat. So those are the functions of your liver. Okay. We have talked about already the passage of bile or pathway of bile. So you already know that. Just couple clinical conditions. One interesting clinical condition is called diverticulosis. Another is diverticulitis. So, what is that? If you see inside the intestine, you know that innermost layer is the mucosal layer. Sometimes what happens in the mucosal layer, some cysts, tiny cysts are formed like this. Okay. These cysts or sacs or pouches are called diverticuli, plural. So, diverticula. Diverticula are tiny cysts or pouches or sacs formed in the mucosa, and the process, the condition is called diverticulosis. These structures are called diverticula, and once these are formed, that condition, clinical condition, is called diverticulosis. Okay, and sometimes what happens, these sacs get filled with fecal materials, feces, and can infect them. And if these cysts get infected, sacs get infected, that is condition is called itis. Itis is the inflammation. So diverticulitis. Fecal fecal materials. The content in the stomach, right? That can cause inflammation, and that condition is the diverticulitis. This can eventually can make the wall of the intestine harder and narrower, and can block the passage of food. Small pain is felt mostly. In most of the cases, the pain is felt. Okay, cramping, weak cramping kind of pain in the left side of the abdomen that can cause narrowing of the intestine, this condition, and obstruction of the food. Another is another clinical condition that is called Crohn's disease, also called regional enteritis. Also called regional enteritis. Okay. This is the one kind of inflammatory disease in the intestine, and mostly occur in white people at age of 20 to 40 during that time, white adults, and this is actually one kind of immune disorder or allergic reaction due to immune disorder. So that inflammation occurs in the intestine due to disorder in immunity in the immune system or body, and that is the Crohn's disease. And same thing happens, like intestinal wall can be rigid, get stiff, and also obstruction can occur. Appendicitis, one clinical condition, very commonly heard, appendicitis. That's the inflammation of the appendix. Sometimes what can happen, cecum and appendix is a finger-like structure, worm-like structure attached to the cecum, and what can happen, the fecal materials can accumulate there, stuck there, and cause infection in the appendix. That will cause the redness, swallowing of the appendix, and sometimes that can block the artery. In the appendix, you have end artery. The artery ends here, is not connected to other arteries. So, once infection occurs, that can sometimes block the artery, the blood flow, and then that can cause gangrene of the appendix. That could be dangerous, okay? And sometimes it can burst and the fecal materials can get out and spread in the peritoneal cavity, because it is a huge cavity, and cause infection or inflammation in other organs, okay? So that's why once you suspect, you should remove it quickly before it bursts, okay? Usually appendicitis, the pain starts in the center of the abdomen, right, and gradually moves to the usually right side of the abdominal cavity. Peptic ulcer, I have already talked about, gastric and duodenal together called the peptic ulcer. Liver, in liver, one common condition is cirrhosis. cirrhosis. Cirrhosis of liver. This is actually the inflammation, chronic inflammation of hepatocytes, liver cells. Hepatocytes. And eventually the soft liver tissue gets harder and like fibrous, and liver becomes non-functional. Okay, so that is another condition. Another one, interesting, gastrointestinal reflex disorder, GERD, gastroesophageal reflex disorder. Backflow of the stomach content, which is acidic, you already know, into the esophagus. If you remember, at the end of esophagus, you have gastroesophageal sphincter here, then the stomach, right? Remember that? Lower end of the esophagus, that remains constricted. But if for any reason it is open all the time, wider, then the stomach content can get into the esophagus, which normally is not expected, right? Should not happen, because it should remain constricted and not let the stomach content back into the esophagus. But if that happens, that's the condition, reflex disorder. The stomach content, acidic, can enter and can burn the lower end of the esophagus. You know, if continuously acidic stuff get back, that will eventually cause erosion here. Okay. So those are few conditions. Just know that. We will stop here. Here, very end.